Hey, to all the managers and leaders out there, your role is like being a maestro, conducting a collection of different people, challenges, and triumphs. It's not always easy, we know that, to keep everyone in harmony, but when it works, it's pure symphony. So join us by the virtual water cooler as we share learnings and strike the right chord for success together.
Hi, everyone. Hi.
Hi, I got to tell the listeners how this recording started.
There's actually a number of things you could share, but okay.
Yeah, okay. So all of us, Dana was talking and I couldn't hear anything. And my only response is, Dana, what did I say?
So she can't hear me, and then she does hear me, and blah, blah. And she's just like, Dana, you've got a short somewhere. You better make sure you're plugged in tightly. Metaphorically, that could really be talking about a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a lot of like little jest in those comments. So
And I feel like that's something we could say before we do our workshop.
yeah, right. And I just think make sure you're plugged in tightly is absolutely an accurate request.
Yeah, exactly.
On many fronts.
As the years march on.
Yeah. So I have to say, Dana, like starting to get into the episode a bit, I am still, weeks later, still super intrigued about the Kendrick Lamar halftime show at the Super Bowl.
All right. So full disclosure, I did not watch it. I watched the Super Bowl every minute of it, but I didn't watch the halftime show because I was watching the Puppy Bowl on Animal Planet. And I have no regrets.
Yeah.
I'll watch cute little puppies chase around a toy all day. But okay, I have heard though.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of feedback, depending on your demographic and your generation, whether people are liked it or not. But the thing that was most fascinating to me, and I somewhat took my own instruction out of episode 1, which is seek to understand and obtain context, was the amount of messaging that was built in, right? It was built in throughout the performance.
And a lot of symbolism.
The inclusion of Samuel L. Jackson. So there was a tremendous amount of symbolism. So, and it would take me like a whole episode to get into it, but if you're interested, go Google it and you'll see.
Was there a puppy?
There was no puppy.
Okay.
There was Samuel L. Jackson. SZA was on.
Yeah.
Tremendous amount of symbolism. But my favorite tweet.
So the Twitter sphere started going, right?
Oh, crazy.
Okay.
Crazy. But my favorite tweet was, oh my God, I can't believe there's not a single white dancer. Which, of course, someone then retweeted and said, oh, so I guess you're asking for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I about fell out of my chair with the most giant touche I've ever screamed in my entire life. It was such a brilliant post. I just loved it.
That's a riot. That's
pretty funny.
Well, I was fully ensconced in my puppies, and you
missed it. But I have one more thing to reflect back on. For our longtime listeners in season 1, we talked about Jalen.
We did.
Jalen Hurts and his leadership abilities. If you remember from that episode, if you don't, go back and listen. Mm-hmm. It was a lot about how he internalized his loss in the last episode, last Super Bowl, whatever, in the last Super Bowl. And
Super Bowl podcast.
Yeah. And it's just interesting to see how his learnings played itself forward into a dominating win and an MVP trophy. Yep. And afterwards, his interview was equally as balanced, appreciative, and reflective. So shout out to him. He's just classy. Shout out to our boy, Jalen.
Yeah.
As we reflect on Super Bowl stories. Still, well, because I'm like a sports person. So I'm horribly missing football. So I'm still weeks later reading Super Bowl articles.
We touched on this last episode that Rose has
sad.
a hard time cycling out of the season. But it's not a bad segue actually into this episode, which continues our exploration of feedback. But this is about Last one was about receiving it. You are the receiver. Now you're the giver. And in a role like Jalen Hurts has, and really anyone who has to mobilize a group of people, you do have to give feedback sometimes. And there's all kinds of feedback. And so we're just going to talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah, and I think it's just before we get started, it's really important to kind of highlight what's even the point of giving feedback. Like, what is it and what isn't it? We talk about that in psychological safety, and it's not an effort to control someone. Only intent should be a positive set of input to help your employee succeed and develop. And if that's not why you're giving it, you should really check yourself.
Yeah, and there's some nuance to that in that you don't want to give someone feedback simply because they're not doing it the way you would do it, right? Like that's if they're still getting to the result and it's a quality result, then do you really need to be giving feedback? That said, sometimes in order to enable that person's success, it needs to be a really tough, difficult conversation about how what they're doing or not doing is sort of hurting them and the team's results potentially. So it's sort of this, it is for that person's success, because if they can't sort of course correct, they're not going to succeed in their job and they might lose their job. So there is that course correction kind of feedback, which still feels really icky, but the intent of it still is really to enable their success or to acknowledge that it's just not working and the next steps need to be taken. That's the most severe case.
Well, and I think regardless, I think we should also just acknowledge before we get into the process of giving feedback that it's difficult for the giver and it's difficult for the receiver.
Totally.
Like we talked about in the last episode of why we have like such agita over getting professional feedback when we, are used to receiving it as athletes and artists, right?
Yeah, in other contexts.
In other contexts. But even as a manager, it is going to require guts, good intent, and preparation to do it effectively.
Yep. The more worried you are about the conversation, the more you need to prepare. And you really need to, I'm not saying you need to script yourself, but you do need to think about, how do I want to open this? And what are some of the key points that I want to make and make sure that we explore. And the more awkward you feel about the conversation, the more that type of preparation is important. Now, here's the thing though, is I think I brought this up last time, but a lot of people think of feedback as the other F word, right? And the thing is though, we forget like there's also positive feedback, and that ideally should be pretty frequent as well, as long as it's justified. And then there's the growth and development feedback, which isn't that they're doing something horribly wrong. It's just that in order to make it to the next level or to just kind of get better, there are ways they could improve or fine tune.
Well, and then the other thing that I would just add to that, and then we can jump into how, is the longer you manage, the more challenging the conversations become. And let me share why. I think when you're a first line manager, you're often providing maybe skill set development. Like, hey, you're really, really great at your analytic skills, meaning like when you go off and build out your P&L file, they're rock solid. But I really would like you to learn more about the intricacies of the business itself so you understand the business context of what you're analyzing. It's very tangible. So I'd like you to go sit in this meeting, talk to this person, participate in this project, because I want to build your business acumen. As you become more senior, in many cases, you're providing that feedback as well as behavioral feedback.
Talk about that, because that's the harder one.
I think so. So like an example that I would give you, there was a situation throughout my career where the person was asking a perfectly fine question. And I'm just giving you a really super basic one, a very, very reasonable question. when they sent the email, it was in all capital letters.
Right, right.
It was just in all capital letters. So, I mean, something that
We
was
know that typically can be interpreted as yelling.
inflammatory, right. And I'm sure the person simply had caps lock on and they didn't want to retype the message. I mean, it could be something that basic, but understanding the impact of something as simple as the way you type an email created breakdown in collaboration with the person receiving it.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's just call it like it is. They got pissed off.
Yeah,
They're like,
because they
what's
thought
up with
they
the
were being yelled
caps?
at. Yeah,
Yeah, they
yeah.
thought they were getting yelled at versus asking a simple question. So that's just a very, very basic example. There's also examples on how to approach problem statements and difficult people and how you present yourself in meetings or in situations. So that gets a little bit more touchy. So that's
It's the
why I
harder
said
stuff.
it's harder stuff because you're talking not about areas where they would agree they want to develop to improve, but you're talking about their self, their
Yeah, that's how they
being,
feel it, and that's how
their
we feel it.
approach.
Like whenever we're saying they, it's also us, right? Because we've received feedback and we know how that feels. Yeah, the it's sort of I always talk about how feedback focuses usually on one in the workplace in one of two things. I mean, it's either about the actual work, right? Like your reports had a lot of errors, or you've missed three deadlines now, or you hit it out of the park in that presentation. Like you were able to field the questions, you were clearly prepared. But it's about the work. And that is typically the one that feedback givers feel more comfortable with, as opposed to the behavioral stuff, like you cut people off at meetings and act impatient with them,
You're an
or
oxygen thief,
yeah,
Rose
yeah, or
School. Yeah.
you're an oxygen thief, or Dana, you need to find a half speed because and so those are the ones that are more difficult to provide that kind of feedback, and it's also harder to receive it because it does feel like it's like, but you're talking about me as a person, right?
So we've talked about the intent behind it, what the intent should be, and we've talked about whether it's skill set or behavioral. So Dana, I know you've given me a lot of coaching and insight on this. So maybe you can hit like how to provide feedback without having someone become defensive. How do you minimize the defensiveness in the approach?
Right. Okay. And what you just said is really important because the only thing, first of all, feedback's to be done well is a two-way street. It's got to be a conversation. And you can only own one part of that, right? So, what you want to do is everything in your control to set the conversation up for success and minimize defensiveness. That said, you don't have control over how they're going to receive it. And so, I think it's very important. A lot of people consider themselves like, I failed at giving feedback because the person wasn't happy and couldn't hear it. And I would say that that's not on them. Assuming you've done your part in providing feedback with respect and specifics, and you've avoided certain things, which I'm about to talk about, then their inability to receive the message is not on you. So that's one thing that's really important. So that said, though, there are things, if you're the one giving the feedback, that you can do to set it up to minimize the chances that a person is going to react negatively. But you don't have complete control over that. So just know that. Here's the thing. Any type of feedback conversation, whether it's positive or growth or real like course correction stuff or behavioral stuff, it's the same in that the conversation should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's one thing we often forget because we get stressed about it. And we often really think mostly of the beginning, which is like, how am I going to give this? Like, how am I going to bring it up? But really, we need to be prepared for the whole flow, which is give it, ask for a response, and then you enter the middle, which is like, let's talk about how do you see it and help me understand that and explore a couple things. And then you want to wrap it up. Depending on the type of feedback, it could be like agreement on next steps going forward. It could be a variety of things. But just remember that when you're preparing for a feedback conversation is it's a whole flow, beginning, middle, end. And be ready sort of to handle all of it. The other thing I would say is you have to ask for a response. And that's what gets people kind of stressed. They're like, but what if they're really mad at me? And I will be the first to agree that bites. It bites when you make every effort to deliver feedback in a professional, respectful way, and they still throw sort of anger or what have you your way. But my opinion is if you don't ask for a response, I mean, that's how they feel anyway. You might as well know if your feedback is landing or if it isn't, because that's gonna be data for you to ponder sort of what's next. And I do like a half day workshop on this, so we could do a whole bunch on diving into like what can come in terms of reactions. Maybe that could be a different episode, but I'll just kind of leave it there. What do you think, Rose, so far about what I've said? When you think about your real life.
Yeah, a couple things I guess that I would comment on this, and then maybe we can role play. Maybe I pretend like I'm giving you as an employee feedback, and then you tell me where I screwed it up, or if I did well. Okay. Okay. So before that, a couple things I would add. One, there's the type of feedback where you have the opportunity to prepare, as Dana stated. I also think it's really, really important that if the situation dictates, that you provide real-time feedback. Like if you see someone do something completely inappropriate in a meeting, and let's just riff off of one that you just said, which is, your employee continually talks over to the new person that's joining the organization, just say because they're not as well up to speed on the issues, right? So if you find them talking over, rolling their eyes, looking at their watch while the other person, it's bad behavioral things. I think in that situation, it's really important to walk out of the room and address the issue. It's fresh. You could provide very specific input and agree upon an action plan. So that's the only thing that I wanted to add was sometimes it's required to be real time. Okay, so let me think. Oh, go ahead.
To reinforce though, regardless, it should be timely, like 100%. I'm sure many people listening, and myself included, can think, you don't want to hear in your review that for 6 months you've been doing something wrong, right? Like, why didn't you tell me earlier, right? So it should be timely. And then absolutely, you need to be ready if it really has to happen real time.
I would agree. Okay, let's see if I can think of an example. Let's just keep going off the one that we've been using.
Okay.
Dana, I threw some time on your calendar. We're just going to talk about, I'd like to just give you some real-time feedback.
Okay. So quick. So Rose, what you just did is really important, which is that you signaled to me that feedback is coming. That's really important.
Oh, good. That's good then.
You have to let the person mentally prepare, even if it's a millisecond. And it doesn't have to be as sort of straight. You said it one way. I want to give you some real feedback about X. It could be, I'd like to talk about the meeting yesterday and how it went. Whatever it is, give them that micro moment to prepare. Let them know, as opposed to just lighting into it, which has happened to me many times. And I'm not even hearing it because I don't really understand even what's happening.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So good.
Okay. So I'm going to throw some time on your calendar for tomorrow. So we walk in the room. Dana, we were sitting in the meeting yesterday, and I just wanted to share some observations that I had watching how you interacted with peers within the meeting. And I want to give you some very explicit feedback, because I think in this situation, that behavior could be detrimental to future progression. And I want to nip it in the bud while it's fresh. Yes.
Okay. So this is fun. Listeners, we have not rehearsed this, but
No,
Rose is clearly a pro. So I am not setting her up for all this. You just did something that is so incredibly important when it comes to feedback. And a lot of us forget it, myself included, which is you have to focus on impact. You're not giving the feedback just because it's fun, or hopefully not. Ideally, it's to enable their success. And so there's got to be something that it's impacting. Right. And you just brought it up. Like, I think I can't actually even remember what you said, but it was something about your relationships with your peers. It could negatively impact them if you keep doing it. And so anyway, if people listening, if you take one thing away, link to an impact. And if it's positive feedback, then link to the positive part, like the positive impact it's having. Okay.
Okay, so yesterday when we were in that plan meeting, we have a new member of the team, Trisha. And Trisha was trying to make a couple points. And, she comes with some fantastic industry experience that we want to make sure that we get out on the table. Even though she's new, she's coming up to speed. And there were a few times in that conversation where I noticed that you talked over her. You didn't let her finish her sentence. I actually saw one instance where you rolled your eyes, which is, it's very disrespectful if she would have seen that. And what's the impact of that? Number one, Trish might shut down and not talk as readily. And that's not good for us as a team because she brings a lot to the conversation. That's why we brought her into the organization. And I don't want your relationship with Trisha to be impacted because of what may have just been a in passing response by you. So moving forward, I would really like you to take. Oh, you're gonna give me feedback?
I am, because you skipped right to the end.
Oh, I didn't ask for. Did you hear me? Yes.
And I wouldn't say, "Did you hear me?" I'd say, "How do you see it?" Yeah.
How do you see that situation? Oh, okay. So Dana, do you agree? Did you see the situation the same way?
Exactly. Do something to invite a response. So quickly, let me break down your opening. So here's what you did that's so important is that, and again, we didn't script this, but Rose just knows what she's doing, is you really need to have specific examples that are observable. Meaning, if you had just been like, I don't think you were really respectful to Trisha and I don't want that going forward, that is not specific at all. And I still might have no idea what you're talking about, because there are times when people are willfully, fully self-aware, being disrespectful. There are times when we're not self-aware of the impact we're having, right? And so if you had just left it with, I think you were disrespectful to Trisha and you need to work on that, that's just giving me nothing. I mean, maybe I know what you're talking about, but maybe I don't. And so the fact that you had specific examples of, you talked over her, you interrupted her, one time I saw you roll your eyes, that's what you want. Observable, concrete stuff. Here's the other thing that you didn't do that's so important is you could easily have said, I want to talk about that meeting because you were pretty rude to Trisha. And here's what you did. And then you share those 3 examples. You didn't do this, but if someone did do this, by saying you were pretty rude,
yes,
that is a judgmental word. And you would have basically created immediate defensiveness in that person that stops them from being able to hear the rest of it, right? And by the way, it might be true that the behavior would be described as rude. It's just not serving
any purpose in the conversation.
It won't serve the conversation because those judgmental words, rude or whatever, immediately feel like a threat. They immediately make people defensive, and it stops their ability to hear the rest of it. So I think I just encourage anyone who's got to give like course correction feedback, like real sort of, and especially on the behavioral side, resist those judgmental words and just focus on the specific behaviors that you're observing.
Okay. So in an interest of time, let's just assume that you heard the feedback and you were like, yeah, I know I get excited sometimes and I cut people off.
Which, by the way, this could be feedback that I've actually gotten. And I don't mean to be rude. I really don't, but right. I get hot to trot. So, okay, now we've had the middle.
Let's get to the end. Okay. So why don't we do this moving forward? Obviously, I would like to ask you to be more cognizant of your approach in meetings, allowing others to have time on the floor and complete their thoughts, at which, you're a tremendously valuable part of the team as well. I want your input. Just give the other person some space to get their opinions on the table as well. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing is that maybe if I see you doing it and I'm in the meeting, maybe I'll give you a little sign in case it's something that you're not completely even aware of that you're doing. And, you just told me you wanted to improve. So maybe we'll come up with a little sign and then we'll get back together and say like 6 weeks and let's just assess how it's going.
Yes, and believe it or not, Rose, literally, I had someone I was working with who did that very thing. They were like, "I'm gonna stand up when you're getting all hype," so it's pretty funny. I think that's both great. Here's the one thing I would probably tweak about that, which is I would have first said, what do you see as next steps?
Oh, okay. That's fair.
And then see what that person generates. And then if they don't sort of go in the direction that you're hoping, I would then add on what you're talking about. But it's always, we know how that feels. Like it's always better if we can kind of suggest.
Yeah, makes them part of the process so they can't complain about it later. Okay,
Yeah.
that was fun. So let's wrap it up, Dana, with some hot takes.
Oh, hot take. I think talk about impact and avoid judgmental words. Those are the main things you can do to set your conversation up for success.
And I would say feedback is a gift. I personally have had some very defensive responses, and I can say in every instance, those individuals come back later and are thankful that I had the chutzpah to give them the feedback so that they could improve once they had a chance to think through the feedback and how they wanted to react. So feedback is a gift. And then
final comment from me is just that back to the if they don't receive it the way you hoped, that's not on you if you've done your part. That said, a lot of times it might not seem like they have embraced the feedback, but often it is landing. And to Rose's point, they might come back around later and be like, I've thought about what you've said and you were spot on. Or even if they don't, you'll notice the changes. So just don't think you've failed if the person's not like, you're totally right and thank you so much. It has had an impact. The conversation has had an impact.
Yeah. And to wrap it up, make sure you hold up your end of the bargain as the manager. Make sure you then follow up on that feedback and provide either positive or continued development input on how they need to act, behave, improve, change moving forward.
Yep. And if it's positive, just keep giving
Let them know
positive reinforcement
immediately. But follow up. Don't talk the talk and not walk the walk.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the accountability piece, right? The conversation, which was so anxiety producing, is going to be a waste if you don't follow up.
Well, here we go. Thank you so much, Dana. That was some great instruction that you gave, and we will talk to you all in the next episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow.
Woo!
We're out.